Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this audit meeting this evening, to be commencing at 7:30. And I thank everybody for attending. And I'm going to add in a vice chair, if I may. And Councillor Hicks, you were very kind enough to offer to be the vice chair for the evening, for which I thank you. Item 1 is to receive apologies for absence, and we have that from Councillor Stockwell, Councillor Boutrop and Councillor Adams. That brings us to item 2, which is to receive declarations of interest from members in respect of any matter on the agenda. And are there any? We have none, thank you. I'd like to go to item 3, which is to confirm the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 21st of February, and we use our voting buttons to confirm your views. Thank you. Are you?
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, that motion was carried with 3 votes in favour and 1 abstention, no votes against.
Thank you. That brings me then to item 4, to consider any item the Chairman agrees to take as urgent business. I have none. And that now brings us then on to item 5, the annual governance statement 22-23, which is pages 7 to 14. And Louise Duffield, Director of Resources and Organisational Development, will open this item. Louise, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So, yes, members, this is the annual governance statement for the current financial year that has just come to conclusion. And you'll see that it sets out the governance structures for the organisation, which many of you will be familiar with, having just had a look at the Constitution, and it provides a statement of assurance signed on behalf of both the leader and the head of paid service, setting out the framework of governance under which our accounts are considered. So committee are asked to, subject to any questions, approve that statement.
Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not really a question, but I'm not going to miss the opportunity to once again lament, as I did at Council, the reduction from 3 to 2 scrutiny committees, which I think really is a reduction in governance of this Council. I note that the leader of the Liberal Democrat group suggested that it could be reviewed early. And I would certainly want to be looking, should I be returned to this chamber, for that to be the case, that it is reviewed and we go back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Councillor Hicks.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just a question about whether, in relation to our role as charity trustees, there needs to be any comment in the governance statement, noting that it's a different type of governance that the council has in respect to those charities. Whether we should be highlighting that we keep the assets of those charities separate, and in terms of just clarifying our specific governance role.
So we would normally keep this governance statement specifically to the accounts of the council. Therefore, I suppose, to make your point, reinforcing that distinction.
Thank you. I think that, unless there are any other questions, that concludes the debate. One question I would just ask you, got a comment in the hybrid working. How's that panning out for everybody? Is everybody in sort of 3 days a week, or?
So I think the general pattern across the council is something like a 50-50 flavour, but it very much varies in terms of different types of roles. So we'll know throughout the pandemic that we had lots of people who are in every single day. So certainly what I think we've seen through all of the reports that have come to this committee in various formats, the council's performing very highly, and so I suppose that would be the best test of those working arrangements.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, on that basis, there are no other questions. I'm going to go to the recommendation, which is that the committee is asked to consider and approve the AGS for inclusion in the Statement of Accounts 22-23. Would you please vote accordingly if you are in agreement? Thank you. I think that closes the vote.
Thank you, Chair. So the voting was 4 in favour, none against, with no abstentions, so that's carried unanimously.
Thank you. Right, well, I know that now brings us on to the financial statements 2021, which is pages 15 to 200, so it's probably the substantive matter for this evening, councillors. So I think, Louise, you're going to open this debate, and so I'm going to pass it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, it's quite a mouthful, but these are the 2020-2021 accounts, which originally were considered by this committee in March 2022. And as members will be aware, an objection was raised to those accounts, which is why they've taken some time to come back to us. I'm really pleased to report that after extensive work, the objection has been wholly dismissed. And we have Kevin Souter from EY here to talk about the accounts in general and any questions that we have on that. I think I'm really pleased that we've had a really strong and clean bill of health on that. I'm looking forward to closing these off. So I'll, if it's okay with you, Chairman, introduce Kevin for some short words.
Thank you very much. Kevin, yes, if you would be kind enough, and I would also thank you for coming to a landing on this matter too, because it's been a long time coming, but I think it's a great relief for everybody that it's been signed off in a conclusive manner. Thank you for that.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so the elements of today's report on the agenda are Appendix A and Appendix B to this item. So Appendix B is the annual auditor's report. Normally we would actually bring this to the next committee following when we sign the audit, but given the fact that we've had such delays, we don't want to make any further delays. And the only thing I need to change in this is actually confirming the date I do sign the audit opinion. So we brought this here for your information this evening. Its purpose is predominantly aimed at a different set of stakeholders, mainly the public, so they can access a high-level summary and hopefully therefore understand what we have covered as part of our audit. So it very briefly summarises financial statements and the key factors. We cover those later in Appendix B, which I'll come on to in a minute. But the key aspect within this report in Appendix A is that it covers our responsibilities to document a value for money commentary. And this was a new requirement under the 2020 National Audit Office Code of Audit Practice. So we're required now to set out a view of the Council's arrangements to provide economy, efficiency and effectiveness in the use of its resources and our view on those arrangements. And that's, I think, the predominant area. If the committee would have any questions on that report, that I would suggest should be the main focus as information you haven't seen before. Well, you have seen it before because it's your arrangements, but it's our documentation and our comments on it. And to make clear, our view is that the Council does have appropriate arrangements for economy, efficiency and effectiveness. So that's the purpose of that report. So then Appendix B is the audit results report, and that contains more details on the financial statements audit and less details on the value for money side of things. It's the more technical document that covers the accounting, the ins and outs, the debits and the credits, and the purpose of this report is to provide you with the key findings of the audit so that you can address the recommendations over this paper and take it into account in hopefully approving the statement of accounts and signing the letter of representation. So members will recall, or hopefully recall, that we did bring the previous version to you back in March 2022. In respect of the main findings of the financial statements, it is substantially unchanged. there's only one adjustment that we found after that committee, which was regarding accounting for one of the grants, and so we included that on page 76. So if you compared page 76 of this report to its equivalent page back in March 2022, that will be an adjustment you would note. And then from page 81, I include the summary information on the objection and the key judgments that we made in respect of the objection that was raised upon your accounts. So we, in summary, are now finished. We are ready to issue an unqualified opinion on the council's accounts. Just taking into account, obviously, the council's formal decision, hopefully this evening, to approve those accounts. So on that note, I will not say anything else, but I would be happy to take any further questions or any questions the members of the committee may have.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for a succinct overview of some 190 pages. Thank you. Councillors, do you have any comments? Councillor Hicks.
Thank you, Chairman. Firstly, in regard to the misstatement on capital values of investment properties, can you confirm you checked, was it in terms of checked every valuation or was it just a sample?
We check a sample of all balances across the accounts, so we don't check every single transaction on any of the items, so it's a sample.
And yes, sorry.
Would it be okay?
I'm sorry.
Can I respond as well?
Please do, yes.
I think it's important just to add on here, and it's in the cover report, the issue on valuation is really about bookkeeping. It's about the date synchronisation between how EY time and conduct their book valuations and our local valuers. And bear in mind that these accounts go back a couple of years in time. Rachel is now correcting that, so you won't see that from this year going forward. It's really about making sure that everybody who's taking a view of our investments is doing it with the same set of facts.
Yes, I appreciate that. I think though that can make all the difference as it did with a couple of million on these free investment properties. And I think perhaps that's an area we need to keep in mind for any internal audit to see that the recommendations are being followed. If I may continue with some questions around the actual objection, I don't think it's fair to say that it was entirely disavowed in terms of there's 3 recommendations there which are useful to the council in terms of how we take business forward. And I'm just thinking in terms of how the auditors approached the issues around in terms of property valuation and payments to a third party, and whether they looked beyond the 2021 financial year. And in terms of the key issue around the percentage of the overall valuation used, the 88% or whatever, there's a discrepancy between two separate percentages that the person who raised the objection was concerned about in terms of how we take account of the land that can't be built on. And I wonder if the auditors could just say a bit more about why they didn't take that land into account. For example, if it was owned by a third party rather than the council as part of a wider investment policy parcel, would that affect the valuation? So 2 points, please.
Thank you. Louise, you prefer Kevin, if you'd be kind enough. Thank you.
So in respect to the first item, which was about payments to third party, we looked at the payments for the year for which the objection was made. It is my understanding there are no payments subsequently because the transactions have ended, the land was sold, and therefore there are no further payments to look at in subsequent years. But the work focuses on the year to which the objection has been made. In terms of the second point upon the land values, well, the land, I mean, we tried to explain this in the report here, the land values and the percentages were taken on the percentage ownership of the land in terms of the landowner agreement. And so, you know, it's proportional to the legal ownership of the land, and that's what was taken into account. So we considered the views of the objector, we considered their representations, and ultimately, as we've had explained in here, we have agreed that 81.98% was the appropriate value to use, or that value was not unreasonable to use.
If I may just come back on, in terms of that last point, if a private organisation had owned the full land parcel that the council had, including the area that wasn't earmarked for development, would that have affected the valuation of the total parcel on the basis that it could perhaps be offset against Section 106 payments or such like? And just on the first item, in terms of the issue around payments or transactions relating to 2021 financial year relating to third parties, I don't know whether we need to consider, perhaps through internal audit, whether whether we feel it's necessary to review transactions prior to 2020 in terms of any internal audit.
So I'm not entirely sure I can potentially ask a question. You're asking a theoretical question about valuations in a circumstance that didn't exist and we didn't look at. The land was valued according to the agreements, the Section 106 agreements at the time, the land ownership, and was valued using professional valuers. So therefore the judgment we have made is it was an appropriate value and the appropriate percentages were used. I'm really not sure I can speculate on something we haven't further taken into account in a scenario that wasn't there.
You're comfortable that we can't speculate and theorise? Because I see where you're going, but
it's complex. It's a complex transaction. I don't pretend to understand the full ins and outs. If we were put in the place of a private developer who owned both plots of land, both the land that was eventually sold and the land earmarked for non-residential development, whether that would have made a difference. But I'm happy that the auditors have reviewed it in detail. Clearly, the cost and the time involved. It's pleasing to see that the issue has been dealt with in great detail. I just wonder, in terms of officers and just responding to any transactions or issues that arose prior to 2020 in terms of costs or that we may have incurred, and whether there's any learning from that, I suppose. Because the auditors, my understanding, the auditors only looked at 2021 in relation to the third-party transactions. So it's whether there were any transactions prior to that.
So Mr. Chairman, if I could just clarify that previous response. So while we looked at the transactions that were in 2021, as far as I'm aware, the conclusions we have drawn would equally apply to previous year's transactions, because the legal arrangements, or the arrangements in accordance with the Constitution that the Council had put in place would have applied. So while those previous audits were closed, I can only assume we would have drawn the same conclusion, because the same facts were there, the same legal advice has been taken about how those transactions were processed and used over the period of time. So just if that helps.
and I think you're probably comfortable with that answer, aren't you, Councillor Hicks?
Yes, I think so. But on the basis, we would approach this a bit differently in terms of if in the unlikely event that it reoccurred, in terms of perhaps getting advice at an earlier stage on the complexities of the issue. Is that the correct understanding?
Can you answer that, please?
Are you talking about the specific recommendation in terms of financial appraisals?
Yeah, there's
Yes, absolutely.
here in terms of getting legal advice on the actual nature of the relationship with the party.
Yes, so I think there's a couple of things around procurement and appraisals, and we're very, very comfortable with those recommendations and how they would be handled now, yes.
Thank you, Councillor Hicks. Councillor Cornish.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I just had a question on the grant inquiry or error, I suppose, which I understand is a question of kind of ownership of the grant in essence, in terms of who's administering it. And I just wondered, it's a big number, and I just wondered, is that a kind of wrong press of the button, wrong stroke of the pen? How does it, because it's such a big number, I just wondered how it was identified, really, to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Obviously, I appreciate it's let's hope that we don't have another, COVID situation. But obviously, because it's such a big error, I just wondered, I just need a bit more clarification on how it came about and how we can prevent it.
I think, Louise, you're going to take that.
I'm going to start and then hand over to Kevin, if that's all right. I think I'd just put some context on this really fast changing environment, constant grants being offered rightly to support people and their businesses, with guidance changing, every minute. I wasn't here, I was in a different authority, and it was just a constant stream of new burdens, if you like. And this is essentially a bookkeeping error, and it's about where you put something in your accounts in relation to the amount of work you do, either passing it through or checking it. And that's why I kind of made a sort of a particular point in the cover report, because I did ask Kevin how many other people did this, and Kevin was kind enough to say it was pretty common because we were all constantly adapting. So I don't know if Kevin wants to add anything. It does look like a big number, but it's not. The grants were handled exactly as you would expect them to be. It's about which column they went in, I suppose.
Yeah, that's a very fair summary. I mean, yeah, £3 odd million, but in the context of the total grants, which were around £50 million, as per your accounts, that were administered in that year, all new, different arrangements. Hence, we raised as a risk because it was new and different, and the council had to get to grips with it. And this grant in particular, many councils didn't quite get the accounting correct on that one. The instructions for that one were pretty unclear, and and that's actually why we didn't identify it first when we came to you back a year ago. But then we started picking it up on other audits, went back, revisited, and it was like, okay, there it is. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not a major issue, not a major criticism, and the fact that the learning is there, you pick the learning up and you do it next time. So I'd say unlikely to happen again. There is always learning from errors and issues that are identified.
Thank you, Councillor Cornish. Councillor Gibson.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Got a few points. I'll start, if I go back to, I raised this, I think, over a year ago, the definition of materiality. I just remain unhappy. I mean, the council is a collection authority, which pushes the revenue figure up massively, which means that when we take our 2%, we arrive at 1.4 million. If we really only did that against the 18 million that is the actual operation budget, we would end up obviously with a much smaller figure. And for instance, the pension figure, which was I think was it an under or overstatement? I've forgotten, but 293,000, that would then have fallen under within the materiality range that we would have perhaps had greater interest in. And it does just concern me. I know you're going to tell me again that this is how it's done. But it does mean that some of these quite large figures, and that's £300,000, are perhaps not monitored as closely as I would like to see. On sampling, I just wonder, we talked about sampling the assets. If there's, and there was let's not call it an error, let's call it, sort of differences found. And is that then, I'm familiar with audits in which that kind of change is identified is then applied to the whole asset base, and I just wonder whether that was done. On the land valuation within the land at Hurst Farm that formed the basis of the objection, I'm familiar with it. I just wonder whether the percentage by area was the best way of looking at it. I'm told that when land is valued, often the position within the site should be taken into account. And I just wonder whether that was done. But either way round, I do recall in the debate that the rationale was very clearly set out, and council did agree that it should go forward. And that brings me to I just wonder what's happening about this recommendation on page 86 about the way in which we allow recording of minutes of exempt items, and perhaps sort of that whole story perhaps has sat perhaps as the 9/10 of the iceberg which the Titanic sailed into, as it were. And finally, I just wonder if we've got a figure for what the cost of the work that was done on the objection has actually cost this council.
You take part of it and then hand it over to council.
So thank you, Councillor Gibson. I think I've made 6 points there, if that's okay. So shall I ask Kevin to do the first 4, which, Kevin, they were on materiality as a principle, I think, the pensions liability, the sampling on the asset base, and the valuation principles for Hurst Farm. And then I'll do the recommendations and the costs, if that's okay.
So on materiality, I don't have anything to add to what we explained last time. The council is required to account gross, and therefore we calculate our materiality on the gross figures. Therefore, the pensions adjustment is not material. On the investments or any basis of sampling, if we find an error, we consider what the nature of that error is. So if it's related to an isolated incident, so if you only had one property of that type, and therefore it wouldn't occur in another property, we would not extrapolate. If it is something that is systemic, so you've got a number of them, we would extrapolate that over those properties. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but we do, on every occasion we find something that we don't agree with, consider the factors, and then work out whether we need to extrapolate or test more. So it's not just, well, there's a number and we end it. So hopefully that'll give you a degree of assurance that we do consider things. Looking at the land value, the land was valued as a whole, and the percentage is the share of the receipt in accordance with the landowner agreement. The percentage did not relate to the valuation. I think that covered everything.
So,
Yes, please do.
So in relation to the recommendation on exempt minutes, yes, I find that really helpful, and Kevin has already spoken with the team, and that will be, as you would expect, going forwards. The costs for the objection are circa £35,000.
Are you content, Councillor Gibson? We did in fact discuss the cost, and I suggested that in a previous life I always calculated that from any of our own solicitors that 1 page of A4 was going to cost you £1,000. So you need to be able to multiply it up quite simply, and so I think probably we're getting what we've paid for, and probably we've also got value for money, because it has thankfully put a matter which has exercised a lot of people, finally put that to bed and demonstrated very adequately that the homework has been marked by external people as well. So I think that's an excellent conclusion and worth every penny, if I might suggest. Are there any other questions on this item? Councillor Hicks, did you want to come back? Is it a new item?
Just relating to previous comments and in terms of the objection around the role of the scrutiny committee, I think that there is some concern in terms of that members do not have enough influence over the control of the agenda, but that's partly down maybe to members taking a more exertive role. But I'll particularly highlight that we don't see an overall picture of which areas the scrutiny committee has reviewed in the same way as we would have internal audit, perhaps. So I think that perhaps in terms of the next council cycle, it would be useful to see where the gaps are in terms of how scrutiny has played a role in particular areas, but not maybe missed out vital functions like parking or whatever. It'd be good to have an overall picture when we actually review those agenda, the suggested agenda items going forward. But I think that's down to individual members really to raise those issues.
Thank you, Councillor Hicks, and I'm sure you, where appropriate, will take that on board. Well, that being so, there are no other questions, so we are going to come to the recommendations on page 15. I'm not going to read those out, but there is the recommendation for the committee, 2 items, Roman 1 and Roman 2, and I'm going to ask you to vote accordingly.
Thank you, Chairman. I can confirm the votes were 4 in favour, none against, with no abstentions. So that is carried unanimously for both of those recommendations.
Thank you very much. Well, that then brings us to item 7, of which there are none. But I would like to thank everybody for the robust and interest which you've shown on this committee. There's been some excellent questions raised. And I think that we need to thank everybody, including Kevin and the officers, for providing those papers. But in particular, councillors, thank you for your diligence of reading some quite large tomes over, and we've had some interesting debates, and for that I thank you. And on that basis, I'm going to close the meeting at 19:32. Thank you.